They say rules are meant to be broken.
If you're not cheating, you're not trying.
But what happens if your solution to those rule breaks has the opposite effect?
You've created a time paradox.
And one of the best examples of this is called the Streisand effect. If you've never heard about it, it's basically when a photographer was documenting the coastal erosion alongside the coastlines of California. Well, this meant he was going to be taking photos all along the, well, coast of California. Barbara Streisand's mansion was in one of those photos because, yeah, it was along the coast. So she sued for $50 million, citing privacy concerns.
I like simplicity and monochromatic frames.
And what's interesting is to this point, the photo had been seen only a total of 6 times, with 2 of them supposedly being from her own lawyers. You know, it was being downloaded from the internet. You can track that sort of thing. And guess what? Not only did she lose the lawsuit, but had to pay hundreds of thousands in legal fees. And of course, that $50 million lawsuit naturally attracted a ton of attention, and it went from 6 viewers all the way to tens of millions. That, ladies and gentlemen, is called the Streisand effect. So consider that a metaphor for today's video. I'm Jason from MMA On Point, and these are the top 10 times MMA regulations had the exact opposite effect. So let's start with number 10, no punching. So let's start off with a fun one. If you look at Chuck Liddell's record, he officially fought MMA the first time directly inside the UFC. They were okay with him debuting in such a new sport, as many did back in those days. And well, it turns out there is a fight before that first UFC fight officially on his record that happened in Las Vegas. This being the dark ages of the sport and so much pressure being put on it, MMA was not sanctioned by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which means if you wanted to fight there, you had to modify the rules so it wasn't outright illegal. Either way, one of the ideas to prevent any of these issues was the concept that, well, punching was too violent. No holds barred, as it was called back then, or NHB, was simply too brutal to let go on the way the UFC was promoting it, so this was a compromise.
The barbaric way of their fighting, trying to knee drop on a guy's face or trying to really maim somebody offends most of the people that I've certainly talked to in our state.
Here's a quote from Ron Kosakowski, who would go on to fight Chuck Liddell in this mysteriously lost fight, who breaks it all down. Quote, "Don't forget, back then they were actually fighting the laws of ethics to keep NHB out there. So in Las Vegas, the rules were you could only slap the face. No direct shots, no punching, palming, elbows, nothing." End quote. So the two agreed, and this was the result. Now I ask you, is this what they had in mind? A head kick is far more devastating than the vast majority of punches or palm strikes, anything else you can think of, and this demonstrates how ironic it was to ban punches but not head kicks. By the way, this fight has somehow been shared around as Steve Heath rather than Ron Kosakowski, but this is not Steve Heath. The guy in the video was Ron Kosakowski. Moving on to number 9. All finishes. If you take a journey into the past and look at all the early UFC events, you might start to notice something a little interesting. Literally every fight had a finish, and they happened surprisingly quickly. No fight even went past 5 minutes at UFC 1, and by UFC 4, the longest fight ever was 15 minutes and 49 seconds. That was when Royce Gracie memorably tapped out Dan Severn after a really long ground struggle. Well, at UFC 5, they infamously tried something new. A super fight. They'd been trying to get a rematch between Royce and Ken, but they kept having injuries and all sorts of things that were sabotaging their rematch from happening organically in their tournament brackets. And so the super fight was booked to get the two together, and they decided to set a 30-minute time limit on the match. After all, literally every fight had been finished under 16 minutes, so maybe this would force some action. The reality is, though, it just gave both fighters a finish line to aim at. Ken was happy to avoid submissions inside of Royce's guard, and it went unsatisfyingly to the first draw ever.
And the crowd does not like it at all.
But the next tournament at UFC 6, every fight had a finish, so all seemed to be right back on track. Well, at UFC 7, Ken Shamrock was back for that ill-fated Super Fight Championship belt, and guess what? Another draw with Oleg Taktarov. So sure enough, at UFC 7.5, or UFC Ultimate 1995, which literally stands for Ultimate Fighting Championship Ultimate 1995. Don't ask me how you could possibly come up with a worse name than that, but they began instituting a time limit with just 1 3-minute overtime. The last 3 fights on that card all went to decisions. The first decisions in UFC history, by the way. And yeah, it's kind of obvious. Why kill yourself going for a finish if you can just ride it out to a decision? So yeah, basically trying to force action with time limits had the opposite effect, and there's no coincidence it was the last fights of the night. Number 8, early weigh-ins. Those of you who have been longtime MMA fans may remember how the evening weigh-ins that still happen in front of a live crowd actually used to be the real weigh-ins. Since June of 2016 at UFC 199, that has since been changed to morning weigh-ins.
I love that.
Yeah.
Is that what they're doing for this fight?
Mm-hmm. You'll have the option starting at 10 a.m. to do that.
We have the option. Oh, and then they're going to do a weigh-in later?
And they'll announce this.
We're all bulked up?
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
This was of course done in the name of safety. Fighters obviously cut weight to try and be as big as possible on fight night so they can have a strength and size advantage over their opponent, with a few major downsides including death. This has never happened in the UFC, but it has happened outside of it, and that was just from the weight cut itself. But also there are many effects on the fight, and one of those issues certainly leads to more concussions. Less water in the body means less water in the brain, and that means a KO shot to your brain reverberating in a dry skull can lead to bigger issues with CTE as well. So this was a sensible solution to solve that. Without a doubt, it is safer on that regard, but there is one problem that the data has borne out that was an unintended consequence. It went so far as to Dana White saying this.
Believe me, we've studied it. The numbers don't lie. We've talked to fighters. A ton of fighters want to go back to 4 o'clock. The numbers don't lie. The percentages are way off. I know a lot of fighters, and most of them are not morning people. They sleep all day, and they're usually up late at night, cutting weight, and then they go to bed, and they can't sleep much. It just isn't working. No matter what, there's no debate about this. There's no debate. We're going to 4 o'clock.
And for this one, let me just refer you to an old video which broke down the numbers. Shout out to Mike Bond for putting out an article discussing this on MMAJunkie.com. I highly recommend it. It involves comparing the 2 previous years from now to 2016 with the new weight cut system versus the 2 years before that with the old weight cut system from 2014 to 2016. So with the old system, we saw 950 fights and 83 events, with 82 events and 962 fights on the new system. So effectively, we've got an apples to apples comparison here. Of those fights, 32 missed weight in the years prior to the new system, and it's jumped up to nearly double now with 62 fighters since this new system has been in place. Furthermore, there's much more alarming data about who's winning as a result. What's really interesting to look at is the win-loss ratio. Either way, I got a 41.4% win ratio. So most of the time, a fighter who missed weight lost. Conversely, with the new system, there have been 27 people that won and 20 who lost. Jesus, I sound so young there. This is like 7 years old. Anyhow, despite having nearly double the amount of weight misses with early weigh-ins, it turns out that Dana's campaign to return to 4 o'clock or evening weigh-ins did not work. Turns out the fighters really like it almost unanimously, so it's not going back anytime soon.
He's gonna punish all the fighters that have been making weight and then reward the fighters that have not been making weight. That's how I feel about that situation.
I really think that it makes that much sense to do this so late in the day because that's less time for recovery, and what we're really trying to do is be ready for the fight.
Yeah, please keep the morning weigh-ins.
I hope it doesn't go back to the old weigh-ins.
Number 7, hydration test. I just got done talking about how the UFC instituted earlier weigh-ins to give more fighters more time to rehydrate before a fight and hopefully prevent serious injuries. But I also mentioned how a fighter died as a result of a weigh-in outside of the UFC. Well, that fighter's name was Yan Jianbing, and he fought for one championship at the time. So one decided to put an end to weight cutting once and for all by instituting something called hydration tests. Makes sense, right? If you can just somehow test how much water is in somebody's system, then yeah, that's perfect. The solution to weight cutting. Not so fast. I made a big expose on this, and although this all sounds great, it doesn't work really at all. First off, hydration tests were developed for hospital patients in a stable and carefully controlled environment. The exact opposite of what a weight cut is doing. In fact, just for the average person walking on the street, it's considered pretty inaccurate. So I spoke to a doctor, his name is Oliver Barley, about this, and he quickly revealed how easy it was to cheat these tests.
Tricking the test, super easy. So basically, let's start urine. So your body actually doesn't have a direct way to measure all the fluid in your body. What it does is it goes off concentration of key solutes, and let's just say electrolytes. When you sweat out fluid and electrolytes. As you sweat out fluid and electrolytes, your blood becomes more concentrated. So a greater amount of electrolytes per unit of blood. Now, as that concentration goes up, your kidneys go, we're dehydrated. Let's start conserving fluid. Happy days. And then the urine becomes more concentrated and you're testing that urine. Now, the thing is, when you rehydrate, if you rehydrate with distilled water to make it even less things inside it, you put the fluid back in, but not the electrolytes. So then the concentration of your blood really plummets, and the kidneys actually think you're overhydrated, and they start emptying urine out, and the urine comes out clear. So you can take advantage of that in two ways with a urine test.
And then let's use an example and just say 600 grams. And then they would drink 600 milliliters of distilled water.
If you've just peed before, the water will then, your kidneys go, oh look, we're actually overhydrated. It will then filter out more clear urine and you'll pass the test.
Simply overcut just a bit, then drink pure water. And this makes the outcome way less healthy, because doing this can lead to something called water toxicity, which also can literally mean death.
I'm not doing this to be able to say, hey, this is what people should do. No, this is what people are doing. And there's a big difference between the two. And to be honest, necking that water before, and when I take a bit of the water mid-next round, that increases my chances of something going wrong. I'm messing with my electrolyte levels, and I'm at risk of hyponatremia. Like, it's a serious problem. But ultimately, this is what people are doing.
People often try to throw out simple solutions to this, like, why don't you just do the weight cut the day of the fight? But fighters will still cut weight, and they even used to do it in MMA. Pat Miletich has a crazy story about this.
I had a weight cut where it was in New Jersey. The weigh-ins were the day of the fight.
Which fight was this?
Shoney Carter. I had a new gym, building a brand new house, had a brand new baby, and I had to win the fight to have enough money for the down payment on the house. So I'm cutting weight, and I've been so busy that I wasn't paying enough attention to my weight, and I was struggling. So I did that all night, and then I made weight, and then I went back to my hotel room and I started cramping. Everything cramped. I had to tie my wrestling shoes on as tight as I could possibly tie them so my feet wouldn't bend like this. And I knew I had to fight that night. So I called up Monty Cox in his room, and I go, you got to get somebody to take me to the hospital to get IVs or this shit's not happening. So they gave me 3 liters of saline, revived me enough.
Think of like a 2-liter Pepsi.
That was 3 of those.
Another one.
It is actually unbelievable the amount of comments that we had from people on the hydration video who thought day of weigh-ins would mean people would just all of a sudden stop weight cutting. Like, no, that's not how that works, and this is a perfect example. Day of weigh-ins are a terrible idea. Oh, and less than 2 weeks after Yan Jianbing's death was when one instituted this testing plan. It's definitely a bad idea and needs to go away. I've made a massive video on this that I highly recommend if you're at all interested. Number 6. Gotta have permission. 2 of the things that I think fans probably wish were legal more than anything else, especially Ryzen or Pride fans, is, well, knees on the ground and soccer kicks to the head of a grounded opponent. And one of the things I've enjoyed about One Championship is they actually do stand out from the UFC's list of other competitors with a different rule set. And considering they're outside of the United States for the majority of their events, well, they've been able to institute these rules as they please. They don't have to go through any legal entity to do it. And the reason for banning soccer kicks under safety concerns is pretty obvious, which one no longer does allow for, although they do still allow grounded knees. But yeah, at one point,
they had an extremely bizarre rule to try and regulate soccer kicks in a safer manner. You could do them, but the ref has to tell you you can first. What?
Bad idea, Jeans.
This is one of the most obvious rules to backfire versus almost anything else I'll talk about today. Memorably for Tim Sylvia versus Andrei Arlovski 4, yeah, they actually did put on this fight back in 2012.
What's your opinion of Tim Silva? What do you think of Tim Silva?
He has a dick face.
Anyhow, that rule was in effect for this fight, and this is what happened.
That was a good much better punch, and down goes Sylvia. In comes the leg kick, and in comes Yuki Shibata.
So yeah, Arlovski won, right? No, he didn't wait for the ref to give him permission.
Uh-oh, wait a minute. There's some controversy here. What's going on? I don't think that he said it was okay to do an open attack.
Due to an illegal kick to the head of Tim Sylvia, this fight has been ruled a no contest.
Literally nothing about this rule made sense. Either way, it was meant to make the soccer kick safer, but all it did was just expose how dumb the rule was, and yeah, the soccer kick happened anyway. Number 5. We still have no idea how to score wrestling. One thing that always stood out to me shortly after the dissolution of Pride and a lot of its stars coming over was when Lil Nog took on Ryan Bader in 2010, just a couple of years after Pride merged into the UFC. It's definitely not a fight worth watching back, but Bader being Bader, he went to his typical game plan and took down Lil Nog over and over in the fight. There were some decent ground and pound moments, especially in round 1, but there really wasn't much else Bader could get going the entirety of the rest of the fight. Only a couple of fleeting takedowns here and there in rounds 2 and 3.
Right back to his feet. And he took him down, but for a second.
Meanwhile, Nogueira was dominating the striking. You know, the whole damage part of fighting. Pretty easy decision for Nogueira, right? Wrong. Bader got the win. Even for the time, that was a ludicrous decision, but Bader was given the win solely based on those 1 or 2 10-second takedowns in the last 2 rounds of the fight. It led to this translated quote from Little Nog. "The way I see it, I won the 2nd and 3rd rounds, and Ryan Bader won the 1st. When it comes to scoring, who did more damage than the opponent? It was me. Actually, the UFC is different from Pride. They worship a lot of the takedowns." And what it feels like to me is an overreaction from some of those really infamous fights like Rutten versus Randleman, where Randleman lost despite controlling the entire fight on the ground. Rulemakers wanted the takedowns to mean more than they did in fights like that. And don't get me wrong, I actually don't necessarily agree with that, but there definitely was an outcry at the time to give wrestling a little bit more weight in the rules. So finally, fast forward to present day, and this rule has long been changed around to favor damage much more, which means Lil Nog definitely would have won this fight if it was under the current system. But I personally do commentary for a UK promotion called FCC in Liverpool, where they had an amateur title fight with Tomas Jakob versus Brennan Gate, who fought for the amateur bantamweight title. And the truth is, basically nothing happened for the majority of the fight, and Gate just got controlled for almost all of it. So the judges scored the fight for Gate, who was on bottom.
Brennan Gate!
It's really hard to argue with all the control time that Jakob accumulated and the ground and pound as well.
Are we really saying that wrestling and grappling matters that little? Like, we're going too far the other way. That's crazy.
He had a few little pitter-patter shots, 1 or 2 submission attempts, but that started to fade in the later rounds, and that was about it.
That was a left hand as well. Jakob landed on the way down.
And this is exactly what I mean. We still don't know how to score wrestling, because this is just going the exact opposite route. And I don't actually fault the judges for scoring it for Gate. I don't fault Gate either. I think Gate followed the rules to win. The judges and Gate were actually following the criteria as it's written. You can't blame either of them. Honestly, the only person I really fault here is the ref for not having more stand-ups. I don't know why you leave it on the ground when there's nothing happening for that long. And my point is, with both of these examples, is it feels like being in a car where the driver keeps turning the air conditioning either all the way up or all the way down. There's obviously a middle ground that feels like more comfortable air inside the car. And that's what's happening in MMA. It's either literally worth everything like Little Nog versus Bader, or now being worth absolutely nothing is just 2 sides of the same extremes. Let's just think a little bit more about how we want scoring criteria to be. You shouldn't be able to win by doing nothing, whether it's on the top or it's on the bottom. Number 4. regulating the juice. Believe it or not, some of the most egregious cheating in MMA has come off the backs of some of the most well-intentioned ideas. In the case of Vitor Belfort, he took full advantage of that goodwill. Basically, for a few years inside of the sport, something called TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, was a legal remedy that was being supplied to fighters who actually had low levels of testosterone. It's really easy to get for somebody outside of the sport these days, and many are well aware of it, but yeah, the rationale here makes sense, especially when you had guys like Bigfoot Silva, who notably had acromegaly, and a well-known issue that comes along with it is low testosterone. So there were athletes that actually needed TRT, and it was meant to help them level the playing field just a bit. The problem with that all well, though, is if you abuse steroids, it can shut down your body's own ability to produce testosterone. And so going into a clinic, which is what Vitor Belfort did, and he obviously abused the shit out of that. Is he the only one? Absolutely not. But he's the most obvious one whose physique wildly changed before and after using it, which of course led to horrible outcomes for some of his opponents.
Vitor, when I fought him, he looked like a cross between a powerlifting champion and the Incredible Hulk. I have no respect for that guy whatsoever. I think he's a piece of shit, is what I think.
Number 3, protect the head. I'm sure you guys have seen how the early UFCs didn't actually use gloves, and people were condemning it as barbaric back then, and how it was unsafe to fight with unprotected hands.
If we can't ban it, we're certainly going to put in place the most stringent regulations possible.
While it definitely is true, as we see in bare knuckle events, that it makes things a bit more, well, gory, to be quite honest with you. Believe it or not, most of what you are seeing is superficial stuff. It definitely means more scars, more blood, but it definitely does not mean more long-term health risks, like, let's say, brain damage. And why would that be? Don't gloves cushion a blow? To a certain extent, they do, absolutely. But they aren't protecting what you think they're protecting. They're protecting hands so that fights can go longer, and you have more of a likelihood of a knockout. One of the old founders of the old SEG-partnered UFC, Campbell McLaren, has one of my favorite quotes about this subject matter.
If hands were stronger than heads, humans would have wiped themselves out many, many, many thousands of years ago.
A boxing glove is not made to protect your face. It's made to protect a fighter's hand.
What politicians focused on was what looked like a breakdown of the rules that they'd known from boxing. And then we would explain, well, actually gloves make it more dangerous, but they weren't listening to that.
And so your first thought might well be, this is just a hand-me-down rule from boxing, not really a regulation that's exclusive to MMA, and you're absolutely right about that. But the difference here is, in the no-rules era, politicians like John McCain asserted that gloves were absolutely necessary to regulate MMA for the safety of fighters.
36 states have already outlawed them. It won't be long before all 50 do. I would like to see it acceptable to those commissions, those athletic commissions that are appointed.
It's very violent. Boxing, we have regulations. They wear gloves.
A glove is an interesting point because if you want to protect a man's head, you put a helmet on him. If you want to protect a man's hand, you put a glove on the hand.
This was a regulation pushed upon MMA in its early days. And don't get me wrong, I definitely like gloves. I get the point. I selfishly do prefer a fight to continue on longer and having more fun exchanges where the first punch to the head doesn't immediately break their hand. That can still happen with gloves, don't get me wrong, but it's way more likely without them. And many of you will disagree with me on that, but for those that do like it like myself, the truth is it does lead to more serious brain injury down the line because you can simply hit the head more often. Number 2, getting fouled means you lose. Man, this is a super niche one. It dates back to the early days of legalization, and it's no better epitomized than one single fight. And it was centered around what was a very good intention. You don't want people throwing fouls, but accidents do happen, namely with groin shots.
Oh, I think straight to I'm sorry to laugh, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that landed perfectly there. It was just.
Oh my God!
Oh my!
That might have to also be a highlight. An uppercut to the jump.
Either way, accidents happen, and you want to outlaw fouls like this, but hopefully not over-penalize what is a real, genuine mistake. The solution, if it's unintentional, there simply is no penalty, at least not for the first infraction. Very similar to what we see today in most fouls, but there is a small twist with this one. Watch this.
Wait right here, Trig. Trig, wait right here. Yeah, smashed him.
Yeah, it's not intentional, but, you know, those things happen.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad kick, but it is just the worst timing. Clearly unintentional, but check out what happens next.
That was not intentional. I'm giving you time. I'm giving you time to recover. That was not an intentional shot. You threw a high kick, he threw it back. If you don't make a decision in the next 40 seconds,
my fucking balls are slow.
If I were you, I'd stand up and kind of bounce a little. If you don't get on your feet within 10, I'm ending it. Not up now, I gotta stop it. Hey, let's go, come on. I'm ending it, I gotta end it, okay?
Winner by abandonment, Frank Chris.
Okay, yeah, this is insane. If you cannot continue, even though it's from a foul because it's ruled unintentional, well, yeah, like Dennis Hallman, you actually lose somehow? This might be one of the least thought out rules I've ever seen. I get not wanting to punish an unintentional foul, but that wasn't Dennis Hallman's responsibility. He was the one that got kicked. Just call the no contest or do what sometimes happens by having the judges score the fight up until the foul occurred. But that's the problem. If you want to make a foul look questionable enough, yeah, you could probably win that way too under this rule set where the person doing the foul can win. Basically a loophole for cheating. Either way, one of the most ridiculous rules to ever exist, and it's no wonder why this one didn't last.
That is so lame.
I know. It's the lamest thing I've ever heard of.
And so finally, number one, just missing the obvious, man. I've talked about this one in several videos, but it's always going to be number one anytime it enters into the discussion because it's just so fucking stupid. So what is so bad about this one then? Well, imagine you just seen egregious levels of cheating in 4K, slow motion, right in front of your face, but you can't do anything about it. Well, that's exactly what happened when Ed Herman infamously took on Mike Rodriguez. Ed Herman was basically getting battered alongside the cage when a low blow landed, pretty similar to the Dennis Hallman example. It looked to be unintentional, so no big deal. Give Herman some time to get his bearings back and we'll jump right back into the fight. Well, at least that's what you thought until you saw the replay.
Ed Herman, you're my guy. I love you, top three in the house, but hey, listen, you gotta do what you gotta do.
That was nowhere close.
Okay, yeah, this is a full-on flop. He basically just crumpled to a body shot and claimed it was a ball shot. This fight should be over right then and there. But the problem is, at the time in Nevada, the rule was you could not review the replay unless it was fight ending. And that should be fine, right? Ed Herman just got stopped, so this should be the end of the fight, right? No, because this rule gave the referee so little latitude that the moment he looked up at that replay, and imagine it was a genuine low blow, he would actually have to stop the fight. If it was a real low blow, that would be a horrible way to end the fight. So ironically, this rule basically just let a guy flop on national television with a referee too afraid to actually just look up at the screen. My personal opinion, if I were the one reffing the fight, I'd be willing to get fired over making a call like that. Maybe just glance up. People were telling him it was not a low blow. He should have just done it, frankly. So yeah, Ed Herman was allowed to get his second win back and rest up from a fight he'd basically just lost, and wouldn't you know it, ended up subbing a clearly frustrated and tired Mike Rodriguez. Obviously, this rule ended up being amended to fix what this fight exposed. It's just mind-numbing levels of stupid. That a guy who milked a fake foul got the win. If our rules are in large part meant to prevent cheating, but instead end up allowing it, yeah, that's a massive fail.
All you gotta do is look at the fucking replay that's playing 6,000 times while Herman's on the ground and say, oh shit, I made a mistake.